The sun in Kandahar behaved like a living creature. Merciless, omnipotent. A white-hot eye staring down at everything that dared to survive beneath it. Heat waves shivered above the sand like hallucinations, bending the air into a wavering mirage that blurred the line between reality and memory. On days like this, soldiers joked that the desert itself wanted them dead. On days like this, no one truly laughed. Sergeant Joseph Hale pressed his back against the crumbled wall of what used to be a farmer's storage shed. Dust clung to his uniform, the kind of fine desert grit that found its way into every pore, every gun chamber, every fold of cloth. He lowered himself slightly, tilting his helmet just enough to scan past the edge of the wall. His eyes, trained by years of unrelenting vigilance, caught everything. A flicker of movement near the ridge, the faint metallic glint of a distant barrel, the nervous shift of the private breathing too fast behind him. "Hale!" Corporal Mateo whispered, crawling closer. "Eyes on the ridge? Possible sniper's nest," Joseph murmured back, still watching. "Or a decoy. Hard to tell in this damn heat." The private, Clark, barely 20, freckles still peppering his face like he'd been cut straight out from some Midwestern cornfield, gulped and wiped his forehead for the third time. "Sarge, I swear the rocks are moving." "That's your nerves talking," Mateo said, giving him a tight grin. "Desert plays tricks on you." Joseph didn't smile. His jaw remained clenched, his gaze fixed forward. He had learned long ago that fear came in many shapes. Sweaty palms, wild eyes, trembling breaths. But if there was one thing he had to do as a leader, it was to absorb it all without letting it leak back into his men. Fear was a contagious sickness, and in battle he was the medic tasked with keeping it contained. He raised a hand, signaling the squad to hold. The valley before them stretched out like a great open scar. Bare earth, scattered stones. A cluster of mud brick buildings long abandoned by civilians who had learned better than to remain anywhere soldiers traveled. Figures could be hiding anywhere in that emptiness. Could be behind a ridge, inside a ruined doorway, watching them. A helicopter's distant rumble echoed overhead, low and steady, vibrating through Joseph's chest like a second heartbeat. It was comforting in a way, proof they weren't alone out here, even though they often felt like they were. The rest of Echo Squad crouched behind him, their breaths syncing with each other in a tense, fragile rhythm. Joseph raised his voice just enough for everyone to hear. "We move on my mark. Keep tight. Keep low. Watch each other's backs." "You sure the intel's good?" Mateo asked. "When is it ever?" Joseph replied, but his tone held neither cynicism nor doubt. Just the tired acceptance of men who had long learned that regardless of good intel or bad, they would have to walk into danger anyway. The squad waited. Clark's breathing had become uneven again. Joseph turned his head slightly, just enough so the kid would see his eyes. "You're going to be fine," Joseph said, voice low and steady. "You move when I move. You stop when I stop. You focus on what you can control. That's how we get home." Clark swallowed hard. "Sarge, do you ever get scared? Like, really scared?" Joseph's answer came without hesitation. "Every time. But fear keeps you sharp. Just don't let it walk ahead of you." Clark nodded, though his hands still shook slightly. Joseph made a mental note to keep Clark close. Rookies could be unpredictable, and unpredictable meant dangerous. But there was also bravery in that wide-eyed inexperience, a kind of desperate courage born of wanting to make it through with honor. Joseph scanned the valley one more time. The wind was shifting, carrying the smell of something metallic and faintly burnt. Diesel, maybe, or explosives. He couldn't tell yet, but he had the feeling that something in the valley was waiting for them. He lifted 2 fingers. 3, 2, 1. Move. The squad surged forward in a low run, boots pounding rhythmically against the sun-baked earth. Sand kicked up beneath each step, catching in their mouths, their eyes, their lungs. Joseph's legs moved with practiced precision, each step calculated, each motion purposeful. He felt the energy of his men behind him, their faith shadowing his every stride. They reached a row of crumbling walls and crouched. Sweat ran down Joseph's temple, but he ignored it. His ears tuned to everything. The scattered crunch of gravel, the tremor of distant engines, the faint whistle of wind threading through broken buildings. Matteo was about to speak when Joseph lifted a hand. Silence submerged them instantly. A glimmer, a reflection, something metallic near the ridge. Sniper, he thought. He opened his mouth to warn the men. But the world went white. A thunderous explosion tore through the air. The ground convulsed beneath them. Sound shattered into a ringing void. Dust exploded upward in a massive cloud, engulfing the squad. Rocks and debris rained down like shrapnel. Joseph felt his feet lift off the earth as the force hurled him backward. His body hit the ground hard enough to knock the air from his lungs. His vision blurred. Shapes twisted and melted. The valley spun. He heard Matteo shouting, though it sounded like he was trapped underwater. Someone else was screaming. A raw, high-pitched cry that pierced through the ringing in Joseph's ears. Clark. Joseph forced his body upright, though every bone felt like it had cracked. Through the settling haze, he could see Clark lying several yards away, scrabbling backward like a wounded animal trying to flee from death itself. His eyes were wild. His rifle had been flung far from reach. Another explosion boomed, not as close as the first, but close enough to rattle the world again. Was it an ambush? A hidden IED? A mortar? His thoughts raced, scrambled by pain and sand but propelled by instinct. He crawled toward Clark. The ringing in his ears warped the world into slow motion. He saw the fear in the young private's eyes. Pure, desperate terror. "Sarge!" Clark shouted. Help me! Please!" Joseph surged forward, muscles screaming. "I've got you! Stay low, stay still." The air tasted like fire. Dust coated his tongue. Every time he blinked, darkness tried to swallow him whole. He reached Clark and pulled him into cover behind a half-demolished wall. Clark seized his arm, fingers digging into flesh. "I can't feel my leg. Sarge? What's happening? We're under fire!" Joseph shouted, scanning the valley. "Just breathe." But the world was chaos. He couldn't see the rest of the squad. Smoke rolled in from somewhere behind them. The ridge glimmered again. Another metallic flash. The sniper? The trigger of a detonator? He didn't know which direction the next death would come from. He heard Matteo through the ringing. "Contact left. Hale, we..." Another explosion drowned out the words. A shockwave ripping through the valley so violently it felt like the earth itself was screaming. Joseph threw his body over Clark. He expected to feel the bite of shrapnel, the tearing pain of metal entering flesh, the end coming like a hot, merciful snap. But instead, he felt nothing. A vast, heavy nothing. Sound drained away. Light dimmed. His awareness slipped as though someone had reached inside his head and pulled a cord. His last vision before consciousness fell away was Clark's terrified face, blurred and distant. His mouth forming a name Joseph could no longer hear. Then everything went black. When Joseph opened his eyes, the sky above him was no longer the scorching white glare of Kandahar. It was a muted gray, a hospital ceiling, its tiles arranged in perfect, sterile lines. He blinked once, twice. Where was he? The world felt muffled. His thoughts came like distant echoes, faint and disobedient. He tried to lift his head. Pain flared sharply in his skull. A nurse rushed in, calling for someone. Joseph stared at her without comprehension. "Sergeant Hale? Can you hear me?" He understood the words, but they felt disconnected, like they were being spoken to someone else. "Sir, you've been unconscious for 2 days. You're in Ramstein Military Hospital. You suffered a severe blast injury. You're safe now. Do you understand?" Safe. The word rattled inside him without meaning. A doctor entered, speaking calmly but firmly. "Sergeant, we need to assess your cognitive state. Do you know where you are? Can you confirm your name?" Joseph tried to speak. What emerged was a rasp of air. His throat felt scraped raw. His mind groped for something familiar, something solid, a memory, a face, a sense of time. But it was like reaching through fog. Joseph, he finally whispered. But the name felt fragile, like someone else had placed it in his mouth. "Good. the doctor said gently. Do you remember what happened to your squad? Joseph blinked. Images flickered, heat, dust, the tremble of the private's hands. But they were broken shards, jagged and incomplete. He could not fit them together. The doctor's eyes softened, as if he already knew the answer. The tests began. Lights in his eyes. Questions he couldn't answer. Instructions he tried to follow but often forgot midway. Voices that blended together. He drifted in and out of clarity. Nurses spoke to him, but their words wove together like threads in a tangled loom. Days passed. Or weeks. He wasn't sure. Doctors talked in hushed tones near his door. Words like trauma-induced memory fragmentation, possible permanent deficit, and early-onset cognitive impairment floated through the air. They said he might recover some things. They also said he might not. Joseph felt like he was watching a stranger's life unfold. Eventually, they discharged him. Not because he was healed, but because there was nowhere else for him to stay. There were no family members waiting. No home to return to. His squad, what remained of it, had been reassigned. Some faces visited him briefly, but he couldn't remember their names afterward. They handed him paperwork he struggled to understand and transportation papers routing him back to the United States. The doctor who signed his release form gave him a long, remorseful look, as if apologizing for something no one could change. Take it slow, she said gently. And Sergeant Hale, if you ever feel lost, seek help. You're not alone. He nodded, though the words didn't land in any meaningful place inside him. He boarded a plane. He arrived on American soil. He wandered through halls he didn't recognize, and eventually he found himself in a small town called Maple Creek, a place where the government arranged temporary housing through a local charity. He lived in a trailer on the outskirts, far from traffic and noise. Time blurred. Days bled into each other. Voices felt distant. Memories slipped like sand through his fingers. People in Maple Creek didn't know his story, not really. They only saw a man who talked to himself, flinched at loud sounds, forgot where he was going, stared into the distance too long, and sometimes broke down crying without knowing why. Someone called him Crazy Old Joe one day, and the nickname stuck. It was easier for the town to label him as unstable than to understand the war raging inside him. He let them. Words lost their sting when you barely remembered yourself. But sometimes he dreamed of fire, of the valley, of a young private calling his name. He woke breathing hard, sweat-soaked, trembling, unable to tell dream from memory. He walked the empty streets at night because staying still made the thoughts louder. He kept waiting to feel grounded, to feel real. But the desert had followed him home. The dust, the emptiness, the feeling of always waiting for something terrible to happen. And in those silent nights, Joseph Hale wondered if he had died back in Kandahar and everything since had been nothing but a slow fading echo. He didn't know the truth. He didn't know what he still carried inside him. He didn't know what remained of Sergeant Joseph Hale, the man who once led men through gunfire without blinking. Not yet, but the fire would tell him. And Maple Creek would soon learn who he really was. The night the flames rose again would bring Joseph Hale back into the world he'd forgotten. And everything would lead toward a moment that would test the last piece of himself that had survived the valley of dust and thunder. A moment that now waited in the shadows of the next chapter. The first winter Joseph Hale spent in Maple Creek was a quiet one, though quiet was a word he could never fully trust. He associated silence with danger. Moments just before incoming fire, pauses between sniper shots, the breath a man drew before screaming. Silence reminded him of losing consciousness in a valley of dust, waking months later in a place where everything he once knew had dissolved into fractured images and broken noise. Even in the gentle hush of Maple Creek, with its snow-dusted roofs and sleepy storefronts, silence pressed against Joseph like a weight he could not lift. So he walked, every night, every morning, sometimes both. On the first night of December, snowflakes drifted down as Joseph shuffled along the main road. Maple Creek was small, barely a few hundred residents, and after 9 p.m., the town felt abandoned. Christmas decorations flickered in store windows, glowing with soft yellows and reds. The air smelled faintly of pine and chimney smoke. Somewhere, chimes jingled from a porch ornament. The world looked peaceful, but Joseph moved through it like a ghost between worlds, his gaze drifting from street lamps to shadows to distant shapes that only existed in his memory. He rubbed his hands together, breath fogging the air. The cold seeped through his army jacket, though he hardly felt it anymore. He sensed things differently than before. Touch, sound, time, all distorted. The neurologist had called it residual dissociation and temporal gaps. Words that made no sense to Joseph, but he nodded anyway. He had learned to nod when people spoke in tones of concern. It made them relax. He reached the corner near the old diner, the one that closed early because the owner, Tom Richards, was pushing 70 and tired of late-night drunk customers from the next town over. The building loomed dark except for a small security light flickering above the door. Snow collected in piles along the entrance, untouched since closing hours. Joseph paused. He didn't know why, but something tugged at him, an instinct as faint as a thread of smoke. He turned his head, scanning the street. A car passed slowly at the far intersection, headlights cutting through drifting snow. Nothing unusual, no signs of danger. Yet his pulse quickened in that old, automatic rhythm born from years of battlefield awareness. He forced himself to breathe. His therapist from the VA had told him to ground himself by naming objects around him, but the therapy sessions were months behind him now, abandoned after the clinic cut his travel stipend. Still, he tried. Street lamp, he whispered. Snow. Building. The words felt foreign, as if spoken through a static-filled radio. A sudden sound snapped his attention, a metallic clang from the alley beside the diner. Joseph's body tensed before his mind registered it, muscles coiling like a wolf sensing a threat. He moved silently toward the source, feet instinctively avoiding patches of ice. His breath slowed, his eyes narrowed. A trash can rolled an inch, pushed by the wind. A stray cat darted out, fur puffed against the cold. Joseph exhaled shakily, then laughed. A soft, brittle sound. Just a cat, he murmured. He walked on. The street led toward the old mill on the outskirts of town, long abandoned after the local economy shifted to tourism. Kids said it was haunted. Teenagers used it for drinking and smoking. Joseph avoided it because its hollow windows reminded him of empty desert buildings, places where unseen eyes waited behind cracked doorways, watching, calculating. Despite himself, his steps turned toward it. His mind slipped sideways like it often did, tugged into memories that weren't entirely memories but sensations. The crunch of gravel under boots, the smell of dust, the same kind of wind whispering secrets. His vision blurred, and for a moment, it wasn't snow falling around him but sand. Heat. Smoke. A voice called his name. Hale. He flinched, spinning toward the sound. Mateo stood beside him. Uniform dusty, face streaked with sweat, and Joseph blinked rapidly, trying to reconcile the impossible image with the empty street before him. Hale. Sniper on the ridge. Move. Joseph blinked again. Mateo disappeared. The winter air snapped back into place like someone had slammed a door between past and present. He pressed a hand against his forehead, breath shaking. Not now, he whispered. Not again. But the visions had been coming more often. Doctors had warned him, post-traumatic hallucinations, triggered by stress, environment, sensory echoes of the battlefield. They said time and therapy might help. They also said he might never fully recover. He wasn't sure which outcome scared him more. He backed away from the mill and turned toward the road leading back to his trailer. His boots left a single trail of footprints in the fresh snow. The cold gnawed at him, but he kept walking until he reached the outskirts of town where the streetlights thinned into long stretches of shadow. His trailer sat alone in a gravel lot near a cluster of skeletal trees. The metal siding was dented and rusted, the windows patched with tape, the door stubborn from years of wear. It wasn't much, but it kept the wind out. Sometimes, he stepped inside, flicking on a lamp. The small space was cluttered with old blankets, thrift store clothing, a half-working radio, and walls lined with torn-out magazine pages of landscapes. Mountains, forests, oceans. Places he hoped might anchor him. Places he wanted to believe existed outside the fog of his mind. He sat on the edge of his bed and rubbed his hands together, trying to will warmth into them. Outside, the wind howled like a dying thing. The night stretched long. He slept fitfully, tossing beneath thin blankets. Dreams flooded him, always fire, always shouting, always that valley. He dreamed of crawling through smoke, of dragging an unseen figure, of reaching out for someone. But he never saw their face before waking. The next morning, the sun rose pale and weak behind a veil of clouds. Joseph forced himself up and washed his face with cold water from the sink. He put on his jacket and stepped outside, squinting at the icy glare. It was Saturday, which meant Mrs. Henley's flower shop was open. She was the only person in town who greeted him without pity or fear. She had wrinkles that deepened whenever she smiled, hands that smelled faintly of lavender, and a voice that cracked from decades of singing in church choir. When he arrived at her shop, the bell above the door tinkled softly. Warm air washed over him, mixed with the scent of roses and soil. The shop was cluttered with potted plants, ribbons, vases, and handwritten labels. Color filled the shelves. Reds, yellows, greens. A stark contrast to Joseph's muted world. Mrs. Henley looked up from trimming stems. "Joseph, good morning, dear." "Morning," he replied, voice rough. "Cold day, isn't it? Come warm up." He nodded awkwardly and moved toward a small heating vent near the counter. He never stayed long. He didn't want her to feel obligated, but she seemed to enjoy his visits. "What's on your mind today?" she asked gently, though she wasn't prying. She always asked like the question was an open door he could walk through or ignore. Joseph hesitated. "I heard something last night." "What kind of something?" "A sound. A can. Maybe a cat." "Likely a cat," she said, smiling. "They roam everywhere around here." "Yeah, probably." But she noticed the tension in his shoulders. "Were you scared?" He paused. "I don't know." She nodded, as if understanding more than he'd said. Fear is a strange thing. Sometimes it's a warning. Sometimes it's a memory trying to speak to us. Joseph frowned. "Memories come and go." "I know, dear." He studied her for a moment. "Why are you nice to me?" She set down her scissors, her expression softening. "Because kindness is something that should be offered, not earned." He didn't know how to respond. Her warmth wrapped around him like a blanket he was afraid to touch. He stayed a little longer, then left with a small bundle of wilted flowers she insisted he take. "For your trailer," she'd said. "Life needs color." He wondered if she realized how much those small gestures meant. That afternoon, the sky darkened. Snow turned to sleet, sleet to freezing rain. Maple Creek grew quiet again, but this time, the quiet didn't feel threatening. Joseph walked the streets, hands in his pockets, trying to find a rhythm in his breathing. He passed the town library, the hardware store, the bakery that smelled of cinnamon and warm bread. People watched him from windows. Some nodded politely. Others looked away quickly, whispering. He didn't blame them. He crossed the bridge over the narrow creek dividing the north and south parts of town. The water beneath was half frozen, forming jagged patterns like shattered glass. He paused mid-bridge, staring down. For a moment, the reflection staring back wasn't his own. It was younger, sharper eyes, cleaner uniform, dirt streaked across a determined face. "Sarge!" A voice whispered behind him. He spun around. No one, just the wind. He clutched the railing, knuckles whitening. "Stop!" he whispered. "Enough!" But the memory clung to him. The face in the water. A voice that sounded so real it made his chest ache. He turned and walked quickly back toward town. His boots slipped on patches of ice, but he didn't slow. He passed the park, the church, the row of old brick apartments on Monroe Street. He barely registered them, until he smelled smoke. He froze. It wasn't chimney smoke. The scent was sharper, biting, filled with chemicals and something darker. Something he knew intimately. Burning structure, burning fuel, burning lives. He lifted his head. A plume of gray-black smoke curled from behind a cluster of buildings. Then he heard yelling. He started running before he even realized it. As he turned the corner onto Monroe Street, the world erupted into chaos. Flames licked the side of a 3-story apartment building. Windows glowed orange, glass cracking under heat. People rushed into the street, some crying, some shouting, some in pajamas despite the cold. "Is anyone still inside?" someone yelled. "Third floor, the Martinez kid," another voice shouted back. The cries blended together in a frantic storm. Joseph's heartbeat changed, slowed, deepened. Falling into an old rhythm he thought he'd lost forever. The noise around him dimmed. His vision narrowed. Every sensation sharpened to a point. And through the cacophony he heard it. A child's scream, high-pitched, terrified, coming from inside the burning building. "Someone help!" a woman cried. "My son, he's still in there." People backed away from the flames. Some held out arms as if to stop anyone foolish enough to get near the inferno. But their fear paralyzed them. Joseph stepped forward. Smoke rolled out the front door, thick and black. Fire roared inside like a starving animal. Someone grabbed his arm. Joe, don't. You don't understand. That whole floor's lit up." Joseph looked at the hand gripping him, looked at the fear in the man's eyes, and something inside Joseph, something ancient, buried, soldier-like, uncoiled. "I understand," he said quietly. He pulled his arm free and walked into the fire. As soon as the heat engulfed him, something clicked inside his skull. A soundless snap, like a puzzle piece falling into place after years of being lost. His mind flooded with sensations he hadn't felt since the desert. The crackle of flames, the sting of heat on his skin, the way air changed direction inside a burning structure, the patterns of fire behavior, the way smoke crawled along the ceiling first, the way oxygen flowed toward the blaze. He remembered, not everything, not clearly, but enough. Enough to move with purpose. Enough to navigate danger. Enough to find the child who needed him. The smoke stung his eyes, but his body knew how to adapt. He dropped low, one hand sliding along the wall, feeling for structure, for support, for the rhythm of the building's heartbeat. A floorboard creaked sharply under pressure. He knew that sound too. He shifted weight, avoided a collapse, kept moving. The child screamed again, closer now. Joseph pushed forward, ignoring the burn in his throat. Somewhere behind him, the world outside shouted his name. "Joseph! Joe! Get out!" But those voices bounced off him like rubber bullets. They weren't from his world. His world was here, inside heat and smoke and survival. He reached the staircase. Flames crawled along the railing like wild vines. He scanned the structure in seconds. Support beams weakened, load-bearing points compromised, collapse imminent. But he had little time. He moved. Every step up the stairs echoed memories he didn't consciously recall. Other buildings, other fires, other men calling to him for guidance. The second floor. Smoke so thick he could barely see. Heat scorching through his clothes. But he pushed forward, heart steady, breath measured. Then a faint cry. "Help! Somebody help!" He followed it to a back bedroom. The door was jammed. Heat warped the wood. He kicked it open. A small boy huddled beneath a desk, eyes wide with terror, clutching a stuffed dinosaur. The child coughed violently. Joseph dropped to his knees. "Hey!" he said calmly, despite the fire roaring around them. "Hey kid, I've got you." The boy stared at him. "It hurts." "I know," Joseph whispered, "but we're going home." He wrapped the boy in his jacket, shielding him from the heat, and lifted him gently. The child clung to his neck. The ceiling groaned above them. Joseph moved. Down the hallway, smoke thick as night, flames popping and snapping at his heels. He ducked under a falling beam, shielded the boy with his body, rolled, rose again without breaking stride. The building shuddered. He reached the stairs, and the floor cracked beneath him. A blast of heat shot upward as a section of the staircase collapsed into the blaze below. Fire spiraled upward in a furious plume. Joseph froze for half a heartbeat, then turned. Left side of the hall. A window. A narrow ledge. An angle he could use. He pressed forward, kicked the window open, shards scattering into the wind. Cold air rushed in like a slap. He stepped onto the ledge, boots slipping slightly on frost. The drop beneath them was lethal. People below screamed, "That's crazy, he'll fall." "Oh my God!" The kid. Joseph ignored them. He hugged the boy tighter, shifted weight, and stepped along the ledge to an open gutter pipe. He judged the distance, calculated force, wind direction, and jumped. They landed hard in a snowbank, rolling to absorb impact. Pain shot up Joseph's back. His breath knocked out of him. But the boy was alive. People rushed the child, crying, praising, thanking. The mother collapsed into sobs, clutching her son to her chest. Joseph lay still for a moment, staring up at the gray sky. Snow drifted onto his face, melting instantly against skin still hot from the flames. For the first time in years, his mind felt clear. Not whole, not healed, but clear. He sat up slowly. People surrounded him but kept a respectful distance, as if unsure whether to hug him or fear him. Someone whispered, "He saved that kid." Another murmured, "I thought he was crazy." Joseph stood. His legs trembled, but he stayed upright. Soot streaked his face. His jacket was scorched. His hands shook. The mother approached him, tears streaming. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you. I thought he was gone." Joseph opened his mouth. No words came. He nodded instead. A firefighter approached. "Sir, you're hurt. Sit down, we need to check you." "I'm fine," Joseph said, surprising himself with how steady his voice sounded. "The important thing is the boy." The firefighter studied him. "You knew what you were doing in there." Joseph swallowed. "I remembered." "Remembered what?" He looked at his trembling hands. "How to save someone." And for a moment, just a moment, the valley of Kandahar flickered behind his eyelids. But this time, the memory didn't overwhelm him. Instead, it blended with the present, forming something new. A beginning. The flames died down. Firefighters worked. Onlookers murmured. Snow fell gently. And Joseph Hale, the man Maple Creek called crazy, stood in the middle of the street like someone waking from a long, terrible dream. But the night wasn't finished with him yet. Because in the fading smoke, Joseph saw a face watching him. A boy, not the one he saved, but another boy. A face he recognized from somewhere deep inside. Somewhere painful. He blinked. The face vanished. But the memory it stirred did not. And so began the unraveling of everything Joseph thought he had forgotten. As the smoke cleared, Joseph felt a shift inside him. Subtle but undeniable. Something old moving. Something waking. By the time he understood it fully, Chapter 3 had already begun. Snow crunched under Joseph Hale's boots as he left the chaos of Monroe Street behind him. The sirens faded, the shouts dimmed, and the world grew strangely hollow, as if the fire had consumed not only wood and plaster, but also the thin membranes separating Joseph's present from his past. The night air burned his lungs, still raw from smoke inhalation, but he hardly noticed. His thoughts churned, shaping themselves into memories, or ghosts of memories, that had been buried for so long he'd assumed they were gone forever. The face he'd seen in the drifting smoke lingered in his mind. A boy, not the one he had saved. Younger, dirt on his cheeks, eyes wide with fear, eyes that looked painfully familiar, though Joseph could not place why. That mystery clung to him like a second skin, heavy and insistent, and beneath it, another sensation simmered. The strange, electrifying clarity he had felt inside the burning building. The way his body had moved with purpose. The way instincts long dormant had risen at the exact moment he needed them. For years, his mind had been a maze of blank walls and dead ends. But now something had shifted. Something had cracked open. And Joseph felt afraid for reasons he could not name. He shoved his hands deeper into his pockets, ignoring the sting of cold on his skin. Maple Creek's night lights blurred around him, soft glows behind frosted windows, the faint halo of Christmas decorations swaying on porches, the reflection of street lamps on the icy pavement. Everything looked the same as it always had, but Joseph felt as though he was walking through a world newly rendered. Danger and hope lurked in equal measure behind every shadow. He passed the bakery, where the scent of burned sugar lingered from the day's production. He passed the hardware store, its neon sign flickering defiantly against the wind. He passed the empty playground, where swings rocked back and forth on their chains with a slow, eerie rhythm. And then he stopped. The creek. The same spot he had stood earlier that day, watching the reflection that had not been his own. As he approached the bridge, the wind whipped harder, sending flurries of snow spiraling in frantic patterns. He leaned on the railing, staring down at the water. The surface rippled, distorting the reflection of his face. It should have been simple, just his own eyes staring back at him, their edges softened by time and fatigue. But the moment he blinked, the water shimmered again, and the child's face returned, this time clearer, eyes dark and desperate, lips trembling, a smear of ash across his cheek. Joseph sucked in a breath, icy air stabbing his lungs. He blinked repeatedly, expecting the image to dissolve like the hallucinations that had haunted him in the past. But this one didn't fade. The boy in the water mouthed something, silent, like a whisper trapped beneath glass. Joseph leaned closer. What are you saying? The reflection's lips moved again. Help. His heart slammed against his ribs. He stepped back from the railing, the cold suddenly unbearable. He scanned the empty street, half expecting the boy to be standing somewhere nearby, watching him from the shadows. But there was no one. Only the night. Only his own ragged breathing. Only the relentless thrum of a memory that refused to stay buried. He turned away quickly and walked, almost stumbling on the icy sidewalk. His vision pulsed at the edges, narrowing, darkening. The world tilted for a moment, the way it had in Kandahar just before the blast wave engulfed him. He grabbed onto a lamppost to steady himself. Not again. Not now. He forced himself to breathe through it. In slow, steady. The dizziness receded, leaving behind a cold sheen of sweat on his forehead. He pressed a hand to his temple, whispering, "Stay with me. Don't go anywhere." His voice echoed faintly in the empty air. He pushed onward until he saw the warm glow of Mrs. Henley's flower shop. The curtains were drawn, and the lights were off. She closed early in winter. But stepping in front of her storefront brought an unexpected comfort. He placed his hand on the cold glass, feeling the ghost of warmth lingering from the daytime. He imagined her voice, gentle, certain, memories trying to speak to us. He wanted to believe that. But if memories were trying to speak, why did they choose to speak in riddles? He walked the remaining stretch to his trailer. By the time he arrived, his limbs felt heavy, his breath uneven. He fumbled with the key, pushed the door open, and stepped into the stale warmth of the small space. Inside, he closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling hard. The trailer felt different tonight. Not smaller, not colder, but somehow more alive. Shadows stretched in unfamiliar ways across the walls. The yellow light from the lamp flickered, as though reacting to the storm of thoughts inside him. He moved to the sink, turned the faucet and splashed water on his face. The cold shock helped, but didn't chase away the boy's face from his mind. After drying his hands, he sank onto the bed and pressed his palms to his eyes. He thought of the fire, the heat, the screams, his own voice shouting commands he hadn't remembered he knew. The way his feet had navigated collapsing floors. The way his hands had known exactly how to shield the child. He remembered Mateo calling out, Clark screaming, the explosion, the blast tearing through his world. The moment everything went black. And then nothing. For so long, nothing. Until today. Until fire woke the soldier inside him. He lay back on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. His breathing slowed. His muscles relaxed, though his mind remained alert, like the night before an ambush. Snow tapped against the windows. Wind moaned across the trailer's metal siding. He closed his eyes. Sleep came in jagged fragments. He saw Kandahar again, the valley stretching out like a scar. Heard the echo of gunfire. Felt the heat of explosions. Saw Clark's terrified face as Joseph dragged him toward cover. But this time, the dream didn't stop there. After the blast wave, after the darkness, after the void, he saw a room, dimly lit, walls of metal and concrete, medical equipment humming softly, voices murmuring in hushed tones, someone standing near him, a shadowed figure, watching, waiting. The figure leaned close. Whispers spilled into Joseph's ear, indistinct, like words caught in turbulent water. Then the dream shifted abruptly. A boy appeared, the same boy from the fire, the same boy from the creek reflection, standing in the medical room, eyes huge, hands trembling. He looked at Joseph, lips forming a single word. Again, always the same. Help. Joseph lunged forward, gasping awake. The trailer was silent. His breath came in sharp bursts. His shirt clung to him with sweat. The lamp flickered weakly. He sat on the edge of the bed, head in his hands, trying to make sense of the fragments. Why did the boy keep appearing? Was he a memory? A hallucination? A message? Joseph stood abruptly, restless energy propelling him toward the door. He stepped outside into the icy night. Snowflakes drifted from the sky, gentle and silent, but the cold burned his skin with cruel sharpness. He began walking without direction, past the row of bare trees, past the frozen creek, past silent houses with warm lights glowing behind curtains. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if something were dragging at his heels. He reached the outskirts of town before he realized where his feet were taking him. The old mill. Its dark silhouette rose against the snowy landscape like a jagged tooth. Broken windows stared outward like hollow, empty eyes. Weeds and dead branches clung to its foundation, coated with frost. Joseph approached it reluctantly. The wind shifted, groaning through the cracked siding. He stopped at the threshold, remembering how earlier that day he'd hallucinated Mateo standing beside him. But now the mill was quiet, too quiet. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The air smelled of wet stone, rust, and something older, something stale like forgotten time. Moonlight seeped in through the broken windows, casting narrow beams across the dusty floor. The space felt cavernous, swallowing echoes whole. His footsteps echoed faintly as he moved deeper into the building. He didn't know why he was here. He didn't know what he expected to find. But something had pulled him to this place, something more than memory or instinct. A magnetic pull from the dark corners of his mind. He paused near the back wall, where graffiti and old paint peeled from the surface. His heart thudded. His breath fogged in front of him. Another presence lurked behind him. He spun and froze. The boy, standing only a few feet away, face pale, eyes huge. The same child from the fire, the creek, the dreams? No, not the same. Not exactly. This boy was younger, 6, 7. His hair was shorter, his posture timid, his expression haunted. But his eyes, those eyes were identical. Joseph's voice cracked. Who are you? The boy didn't speak. He took a step back, shaking his head. Tears shimmered, catching the moonlight. You need help, Joseph whispered. I can help you. The boy's lips parted slightly. You didn't before. Joseph stiffened. Before? The building groaned. A long, low creak that sounded like a warning. The boy stepped closer. His breath hitched. You left me. Joseph felt the air leave his chest. No, he whispered. I don't remember. You left me, the boy repeated, voice trembling. In the fire. A different fire. Not the one tonight. Something older. Something from Joseph's missing years. Before Joseph could speak again, a sudden crash echoed through the mill. A beam groaned and collapsed in a burst of dust. Joseph shielded his face. When the air cleared, the boy was gone. Joseph stood alone in the vast silence, heart pounding like a drum. Had the boy been real? A vision? A memory? He didn't know. But he knew one thing. The boy wasn't done with him. And neither were the memories that had stayed locked away for so long. As Joseph left the mill and stepped back into the freezing night, he felt the shift again. The sensation that something was unraveling inside him. Something important. Something he had been afraid to confront. The fire on Monroe Street had awakened more than just instincts. It had awakened truth. And the next days would push Joseph Hale toward revelations he'd spent years trying, consciously or not, to forget. By morning, Maple Creek would whisper about the town's unexpected hero. By nightfall, Joseph would begin to understand that heroes do not only save others. Sometimes they return to save themselves. And as the sun rose on a new day, Chapter 4 quietly waited in the wings, ready to unfold the next piece of Joseph's shattered past. Morning crept into Maple Creek with a thin, pale light that seemed too fragile to warm anything it touched. Frost clung to every rooftop, turning the town into a landscape of glistening silver edges. Chimney smoke curled lazily into the cold air, and cars remained blanketed beneath untouched snow. It was one of those mornings when the entire world felt muted, as if the night had left behind secrets heavy enough to smother sound. Joseph Hale hadn't slept. He tried, curling beneath blankets that felt too thin, listening to the wind rattle the trailer siding, counting his breaths until they blurred together. But every time his eyes closed, the boy appeared again. Standing in the old mill, standing in the fire, standing in the creek reflection, standing in the hospital memory he'd never fully remembered until last night. Help. A single word that echoed louder than any explosion he had ever survived. By dawn, Joseph sat at the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as if the uneven linoleum pattern might rearrange itself into answers. His fingers trembled. His head throbbed. His mind felt like a landmine field. Any thought could trigger another memory, another hallucination, another collapse into those missing years. He wanted to tell someone, needed to, but who would listen? The townspeople had spent years calling him the crazy vet. Now overnight they'd turned him into a hero, after one moment of clarity in the flames. But that didn't mean they understood him. It didn't mean they saw him as someone whole. It didn't mean they would believe he had seen a boy who might not exist. He rubbed his palms against his jeans and forced himself to stand. The trailer felt suffocating. He opened the door, letting the cold air rush in and sting his lungs. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he stepped outside, the wind whipping flakes against his face. The world looked deceptively peaceful. Still, pristine, quiet in a way that made him uneasy. He started walking without direction, letting instinct guide him. His breath fogged the morning air as he moved through Maple Creek's barely awake streets. A few early risers stepped out to shovel their porches. They paused when they recognized him. One woman smiled awkwardly. "Morning, Joseph. We heard about what you did. That was unbelievable." Another man tipped his hat. "You saved that kid." Whole town's talking. A teenager called out, "You're a badass old man." Joseph managed small nods, but their words slid off him like rain on armor. They spoke with awe, with respect, even gratitude, but they didn't see him. Not really. They saw an act of heroism detached from the man performing it. They didn't see the cracks beneath the surface or the storm brewing behind his eyes. He kept walking. The flower shop's lights flickered on just as he reached the main street. Mrs. Henley stood behind the counter arranging a bouquet of white lilies. When she glanced up and saw Joseph through the window, her expression shifted instantly, concern knitting across her brow. Before he could reconsider, he pushed open the door. The bell chimed softly, and warmth washed over him. The scent of fresh flowers and rich soil enveloped him, grounding him for the first time that morning. "Joseph," she said gently, setting down the lilies. "You look exhausted." He swallowed. His voice cracked. "Did you hear about what happened?" "All of Maple Creek heard," she replied with a soft smile. "You saved a little boy's life. They're calling you a hero." "I'm not," Joseph said quickly. "Too quickly. I just reacted." "People react in different ways," she said. Some run. Some freeze. Some act. That tells me something. He looked down at his hands. Still scraped from the fire, bits of soot lodged in the lines of his skin. I remembered things, he murmured. Things I haven't remembered in years. She stepped closer. Memories from the war? Yes. And he hesitated. And something else. Mrs. Henley waited, patient, gentle, always gentle. Joseph sucked in a breath. I keep seeing a boy. Her expression softened further. The boy you saved? No. His voice dropped to a whisper. A different boy. He keeps appearing. In the fire. In reflections. In dreams. In the mill. His throat constricted. He said I left him. Mrs. Henley's eyes widened, not with fear, but with worry. Left him? Joseph, what do you mean? Is he someone you knew? I don't know, he said, shaking his head. I don't know if he's real or something my mind made up, but it feels like he's trying to tell me something. Hallucinations can be tied to trauma, she said gently. But sometimes memories come back in strange forms. Maybe this boy represents someone from your past. Joseph pressed his palms against his forehead, his breathing quickening. It felt real, the way he looked at me, the fear in his eyes, and what he said. Joseph, she said softly, placing a hand on his arm. You are not alone. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out. The simple word "we" cut deeper than she realized. He stayed a few minutes longer, finding momentary steadiness in her presence, then thanked her and stepped back out into the cold. The air bit at his skin, but he welcomed the sensation. It kept him grounded, kept him in the present. As he walked, he realized his feet were once again guiding him somewhere without permission. The old mill. His chest tightened. He didn't want to go back there. Not after what he had seen. But something pulled him, the same instinct that had driven him into the fire. The same instinct that had led him to the boy in his dreams. The mill stood silent and imposing against the snow-covered landscape. His broken windows looked like gaping wounds. The air around it felt colder somehow, heavier. Joseph hesitated at the entrance, then stepped inside. Daylight filtered through cracks in the walls, illuminating dust motes dancing in the stale air. The echo of his footsteps followed him as he moved deeper. His breath plumed like smoke. No boy, no shadow, just a vast empty space. But the weight of the encounter lingered. The memory of the boy's voice whispered through Joseph's mind. You left me. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to breathe. Why? He whispered to no one. What are you showing me? Silence answered. Then, a sound. Faint. Metallic. Joseph stiffened. He followed the noise deeper into the mill, past broken machinery and piles of debris, until he reached a side room he hadn't noticed the night before. The door hung crooked on its hinges. He pushed it gently. Inside was an old storage area. Shelves lined the walls. The air smelled of rust and mildew. Something glinted on the floor beneath a pile of rotting cardboard. Joseph crouched, reaching for it. A small metal tag. Dog tags. His fingers froze. The engraving was worn but still legible. Clark, David J. POS U.S. Army. Joseph's breath hitched violently. Clark. The terrified private he'd tried to save in Kandahar. His hands began to shake uncontrollably. He stood abruptly, stumbling backward. The walls closed in. The air thickened. His vision blurred. Why were Clark's tags here? How had they ended up in an abandoned mill thousands of miles from Afghanistan? Joseph felt the world tilt. He backed out of the storage room, clutching the tags so tightly the edges dug into his skin. He staggered outside, the icy wind hitting him like a slap. He sucked in air. Then more. Then more. The panic clawed at his throat. He dropped to his knees in the snow. Memories flooded him. Flashes of sand, fire, Clark screaming, his own hands reaching out. The blast, the darkness, and now this, a boy saying he had left him. Clark's tags appearing in a building where they should never be. Unless his missing years weren't as empty as he believed. Unless he had been somewhere, done something, seen something he'd forced himself to forget. He pushed himself to his feet, staggering away from the mill. He walked fast, almost running, ignoring the throbbing in his head and the burning in his lungs. He needed answers. He needed to know the truth. Maps, records, old case files, military documents, anything that could explain how Clark's tags ended up in Maple Creek. He didn't stop until he reached the library. The warm air inside enveloped him, but he felt no relief. He went straight to the small computer lab, fingers trembling as he typed with more desperation than control. He searched military archives, casualty reports, unclassified documents, personnel records. The internet crawled with information, but none of it completed the puzzle. Clark's file confirmed he had survived the explosion, transferred to a hospital, reassigned stateside, then nothing. No death report, no discharge record, no transfer orders. Just silence, as if Clark had vanished. The librarian approached quietly. "Mr. Hale? Are you all right? You look pale." He forced himself to breathe. "Just looking something up." She studied him carefully. "If you need help." "No," he said too quickly. "Thank you." She hesitated, then walked away. Joseph closed the browser and rubbed his eyes. His heart thundered. His ears rang. He pressed his palms to the desk to steady himself. The boy in the fire. The boy in the creek. The boy in his dreams. Clark's dog tags in the mill. Pieces of a puzzle he could not yet see. But he would. He had to. He left the library and stepped back into the cold. Snow fell heavier now, swirling in chaotic gusts that blurred the world around him. As he walked toward his trailer, he felt something shift in the wind. A whisper. Soft. Childlike. "Joseph." He spun around. No one. Just snow. Just silence. But the voice lingered. He reached his trailer by late afternoon, exhaustion creeping into his bones. He stepped inside, closed the door, and leaned against it once more. He opened his palm. Clark's tags glinted faintly in the dim light. Everything changed with that discovery. Everything. Joseph sat on the bed, staring at the metal resting on his skin. He traced the engraved letters, feeling something inside him crack open further. He didn't know where this path would lead him, but he knew one thing. The boy was connected to Clark, and Clark was connected to the missing years. And the missing years, they were coming back, whether Joseph was ready or not. Night settled over Maple Creek again, darker and heavier than the one before. The cold seeped deeper into the earth. Stars hid behind thick clouds. The town quieted into uneasy sleep. But Joseph Hale did not sleep. He sat awake, dog tags in hand, memories stirring like coals beginning to glow. He didn't notice the shadow that lingered just outside his trailer window. Watching, waiting, breathing softly in the snow. And as the clock ticked toward midnight, Joseph felt it. Something was coming. Something bigger than a boy. Bigger than a memory. Bigger than the fire. Something that would drag him deeper into the truth he had fled for years. Snow whispered against the metal siding of Joseph Hale's trailer as midnight bled into the early hours. A thin rim of frost crept slowly across the windows, blurring the view of the outside world into soft strokes of white and shadow. The wind whistled through cracks in the frame like a breath drawn through clenched teeth. Inside, the air felt heavy, quiet, tense, like the moment before a storm decides to break. Joseph sat on the edge of his bed, elbows resting on his knees, the dog tags hanging from his fingers like a pendulum. His eyes were unfocused, staring not at the metal but through it, through the years, through the blank spaces in his memory, through the echoes of a life he once lived and the darkness that had swallowed it. Those tags shouldn't be here. They shouldn't exist in this place. They shouldn't have found him, unless everything he thought he knew about his past was wrong. He rubbed his thumb over the engraved letters. Clark, David J. The metal was cold, biting into his skin. Yet something in its weight felt familiar, like a hand he'd once shaken, a promise he'd once made, a life he'd once tried to save. The trailer creaked suddenly. Joseph jolted, breath catching in his throat. He lifted his gaze toward the window. Snow drifted across the glass in scattered crystals, but beyond that, just darkness. Still, he felt it. Presence. Pressure. Something watching. He rose slowly, muscles tightening. He approached the window and pressed his palm lightly against the cold glass. The frost melted under his touch, forming a small, clear circle. But outside was only the pale glow of a distant street lamp casting shivering shadows across the empty lot. The presence slipped away, or hid deeper. He backed away from the window and gripped the dog tags harder. His breathing steadied, but his pulse did not. He paced across the small room, boots thudding softly against the worn linoleum. Every few steps, he glanced toward the door as if expecting something, to burst through. Didn't. Eventually, he sat again and forced himself to focus on the weight of the metal in his palm. Clark's voice echoed inside him. "Sarge, help me. Please." The cry had haunted him in Afghanistan. But it haunted him here too, in Maple Creek, where Clark had never been. Or had he? Joseph dropped his face into his hands, pressing his palms hard against his temples. "Why can't I see?" he whispered. "Why can't I remember what happened to you?" The memory of the explosion in Kandahar flickered. Smoke, dust, fire swallowing the valley, his body slamming into the ground, sound shredding into a faint ringing. Then darkness. Years of darkness. When he'd woken in the hospital, he'd been told he survived. But what had happened to Clark? The official records gave no answers. The silence around Clark's fate was unnatural, like a story ripped from a book, leaving torn pages behind. Joseph exhaled sharply. He needed answers. Answers the internet couldn't give him. Answers buried in places he had avoided for years. Military records, VA files, old communications, people who might still know. He grabbed his jacket and stepped outside into the freezing night. The snow crunched beneath his boots. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, casting the world in a dim, bluish haze. The cold air slapped him awake, sharpening his senses. He began walking toward town, every muscle taut, every breath trembling with cold and dread. Maple Creek was silent at this hour, street lamps glowing faintly over empty sidewalks, Christmas decorations swaying in the wind, and windows shuttered tight against the winter night. The world looked frozen in time. He passed the bakery, the darkened library, and the old church with its stained glass glowing faintly from a single flickering candle inside. He kept walking. Something followed him. He didn't hear footsteps, didn't see shadows moving. It wasn't anything visible, but the sense was unmistakable, a presence trailing him at the edge of awareness, like the echo of someone walking just behind him. Every time he turned around, he found nothing but swirling snow and empty street. The presence stayed anyway. He forced himself forward. He arrived at the police station, a small brick building with 2 cruisers parked outside and a dim light burning in the lobby. He hesitated at the door, wondering whether this was madness, whether walking in with a set of dog tags and fragmented memories made any sense, whether he should tell anyone. But the silence around Clark's disappearance was too deep to ignore. He pushed open the door. The bell above it chimed, startling the lone officer behind the front desk. Officer Dana Brooks looked up, eyes widening. "Joseph? It's late. Are you all right?" He held out the dog tags. "I found these." She frowned, taking them gently. "These are military. They belong to someone in my squad," Joseph said. "Clark. David Clark. We were together in Afghanistan." Officer Brooks studied the metal carefully. "Where did you find them?" "In the old mill," Joseph said. "Yesterday." Her eyes narrowed with confusion. "Joseph, that building has been abandoned for years. No one's used it since before you even moved here." "I know. But how would—" "I don't know," he snapped suddenly, voice cracking. He dragged a hand through his hair. "I don't know how they got there, but they did." She softened. Okay, let's take this one step at a time." She opened a report file on her computer. "What do you want us to do?" Joseph hesitated. He stared at the dog tags, their metal catching the fluorescent lights overhead. I want to know what happened to him. Officer Brooks typed quickly. Give me his full name. David Joshua Clark. Rank? Private First Class. Year of service? 2012 to... Joseph paused. To 2013. She nodded, typing more. Joseph's heartbeat thudded as she searched databases. After a few minutes, her brows knitted together. That's strange. Joseph straightened. What? There's almost nothing here. She turned the screen slightly so he could see. Not enough for him to read, but enough to show the nearly empty page. Basic enlistment data, deployment confirmation, and then... Nothing, Joseph finished. Exactly. It's like his file was never updated. Or worse, like it was sealed. Joseph's blood ran cold. Sealed for what reason? Officer Brooks shook her head. Usually only happens with classified missions. High-level operations. Special circumstances. She paused, hesitant. Did your squad ever participate in anything off the record? Joseph's breath trembled. He didn't remember. Not clearly. Maybe not at all. Officer Brooks gently placed the tags on the desk between them. I can file a federal inquiry, but the turnaround is slow. And if the file is sealed, they may refuse to release anything. Joseph's hands curled into fists. He can't just vanish. She nodded. I'll do what I can. He turned toward the door, heart pounding, but she called after him. Joseph? He looked back. Be careful, she said softly. If someone didn't want you to know what happened to him, there might be a reason. Her words followed him out into the cold. He stepped onto the sidewalk, dog tags clenched tightly in his hand. The wind howled down the empty street. Snow whipped across his face. His breath came harder now. Not from the cold, but from the weight of the unseen eyes he felt watching him again. He turned. Nothing, but the presence lingered. He quickened his steps, heading for the main road that looped around the outskirts of town. The snow thickened, blurring the path ahead. The world shrank to a tunnel of swirling white. He didn't hear the footsteps until they were close. Crunch, crunch. Joseph spun, ready to fight. A figure stood half hidden by the falling snow. Small, thin, still, a child. The boy, the same boy. His breath caught. No, not here, not now. The boy stepped closer, his face pale beneath the flickering street lamp. Snow settled on his hair, melted on the heat of his trembling breath. His eyes were enormous, dark, frightened, pleading. Joseph swallowed hard. What do you want from me? The boy's lips parted. You forgot me. Joseph felt the world tilt. His hand tightened around the dog tags. I didn't forget, he whispered. I lost. You left me. Joseph's throat constricted. No, you left me, the boy repeated, voice quivering. In the fire. Joseph staggered back a step, boots sliding on the ice. What fire? Which one? The boy's breath hitched, a sob forming. You left me alone. Joseph crouched without thinking, reaching out. Kid, listen to me. I don't know who you are, but if I left you, I didn't mean to. I swear. The boy flinched backward, shaking violently. Then, he pointed, over Joseph's shoulder. Slowly, dread gnawing at his stomach, Joseph turned. The old mill loomed in the distance, its silhouette jagged against the snow-dark sky. The boy whispered, You'll see. The wind howled. Joseph blinked against the snow, and the boy vanished, gone, like he had never been there. Joseph stumbled to his feet, heart hammering in his ears. He clutched the dog tags against his chest, pulse racing. The world felt warped, stretched thin between reality and memory. He backed away from the spot where the boy had stood. Then he turned and hurried down the street, desperate to escape the chilling emptiness. His breath plumed in frantic bursts. His legs ached. His vision blurred at the edges. He reached his trailer and slammed the door behind him, chest heaving. His breath fogged in the dim air. He locked the door. Deadbolt. Chain. Then he collapsed onto the bed, dog tags clattering onto the blanket. He pressed the heels of his palms against his eyes, whispering, What fire? What did I do? What did I forget? Sleep didn't come. But something else did. A memory. Not a dream. A memory. A room filled with smoke. Thick, choking, black as tar. A child crying. A hand slipping from his grasp. His own voice shouting through flames. I'll come back. I promise. Then, collapse. A scream. Silence. Joseph's eyes snapped open, sweat dripping from his temples. He gasped for breath, shaking violently. There was another fire. Not in Maple Creek. Not last night. Not in Kandahar. Somewhere else. Somewhere from his missing years. And he had left someone behind. A child. The boy. He sat up slowly, hands trembling as he grasped the dog tags again. He whispered, voice breaking, "Clark, what did we do? What happened out there?" Snow thickened outside. Wind battered the trailer. Night deepened to an unnerving stillness. Joseph stared into the darkness. Someone had erased his past. Someone had sealed Clark's records. Someone had buried the truth in an abandoned mill in a small town that wasn't supposed to matter. And the boy was the key. Whether ghost or memory or something in between, he was leading Joseph back to a truth that refused to stay hidden. A truth Joseph had once promised to face but had run from. Now it was chasing him. And as the first pale hint of dawn crept across the horizon, Joseph Hale knew that Chapter 6 was waiting to reveal the next fragment of the secret he had spent years forgetting. Snow drifted through the quiet morning like drifting ash, soft and weightless yet carrying the ghost of something heavier. Joseph Hale stood at the window of his trailer as the pale sunlight crept over Maple Creek, turning icicles into shards of glass. His breath fogged the window pane, and he pressed his fingertips against the cold glass as though he could draw strength from the winter outside. The dog tags lay on the table behind him, glinting with a stubborn life of their own. He couldn't stay inside anymore, couldn't sit with the memories clawing at the edges of his mind, begging to be seen. Everything inside him urged movement, instinct, urgency, the kind that had saved him in fire and abandoned him in silence. So he stepped out into the cold, pulling his jacket tight against the morning chill. His boots sank into fresh snow, leaving deep impressions behind him as he walked toward the old mill. Again, though every nerve screamed that the place held nothing but pain. Yet something waited for him there, something he had run from long enough. His breath quickened as he neared the building. The mill loomed like a memory he couldn't outrun. Weathered walls, broken windows, shadows that seemed to shift. The same wind that had carried the boy's voice now guided Joseph closer, urging him toward a truth he had promised long ago but failed to keep. He reached the entrance and paused. Snow crunching beneath his boots was the only sound. He inhaled deeply, forcing down the tremor in his hands. Then he stepped inside. The air in the mill was colder than outside, as if the past itself exhaled frost. Dust floated through beams of light filtering through the cracks, each particle drifting in slow motion. Joseph moved carefully across the uneven floorboards, eyes adjusting to the dimness. He heard nothing at first, just the faint groan of the building settling. But then, soft footsteps behind him. He turned sharply. There, standing near the broken doorway, was the boy. Small, pale, trembling. Snowflakes clung to his hair, melting slowly. His eyes, vast, deep, haunted, held Joseph where he stood. Joseph felt his throat tighten. "Why are you here?" But the boy didn't speak. He only turned and began walking deeper into the mill, toward the far back left corner, into darkness Joseph hadn't explored. Like a thread pulled taut, Joseph followed. The boy stopped before a wall of charred wood Joseph hadn't noticed before. The marks were subtle but unmistakable: smoke stains, burns, warped beams. The scent of fire lingered faintly even after all these years. Joseph froze. This wasn't here yesterday. The boy looked up at him, eyes shimmering. "You forgot." A shiver ran through Joseph's spine, not from cold but from recognition. Memory hummed at the edges of his mind. He reached out and touched the charred wood. The world around him dissolved. Heat slammed into him like a wave. Smoke invaded his lungs. Screams echoed through the air. He was no longer in the mill. He was somewhere else, somewhere blisteringly hot and suffocatingly close. Darkness pulsed with flames. Every breath burned. He stumbled through the memory as if through a dream. He saw collapsing beams. He saw melted metal dripping like tears. He saw shadows running, soldiers, civilians, himself. Then he saw the boy, younger, crying, trapped behind debris. And Joseph was there, years younger, covered in soot, arms shaking as he tried to lift the fallen beam pinning the child. "I'll come back for you," younger Joseph gasped. "I promise." He heard himself say it, felt the desperation, the urgency, the lie, because the fire roared, and the roof groaned, and someone grabbed Joseph's arm. Clark. Clark pulled him hard. "Sarge, we have to go. It's coming down." Joseph yanked free, screaming, "There's a kid!" But Clark's grip tightened. "We'll die, move." The world fractured again, explosion, collapse, impact. The memory scattered like embers swept by wind. Joseph fell to his knees in the mill, breath ripping through him in jagged bursts. Tears streamed down his face before he realized he was crying. The boy stood beside him, silent. Joseph's voice cracked. "I left you." The boy nodded slowly, heartbreakingly. "You promised." Joseph pressed his hands to his face, sobs shaking him. "I didn't remember. I didn't know. God, I didn't know." The boy stepped closer. "You left me, but you didn't run." Joseph looked up, eyes red. "What do you mean?" "You came back," the boy whispered. "Even when you couldn't remember me, you came back. When someone else needed help. The fire on Monroe Street. The child he saved. The instinct that drove him into flames. Not instinct, atonement." The boy lifted a trembling hand and touched Joseph's cheek. His fingers were cold but soft, like snow. "You carried me," he said, "in pieces, in shadows, in the space between remembering and forgetting." Joseph's heart broke open. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." The boy gave a small, sad smile. "That's why I can leave." Joseph's eyes widened in confusion. "Leave?" The boy nodded. "You found the memory. You faced it. And you didn't run this time." Tears blurred Joseph's vision again. "What happens now?" The boy stepped back, and light began to glow around him. Soft at first, then growing like dawn rising through fog. "You live," he whispered. "For both of us." Joseph reached for him instinctively, but his hand passed through the boy like wind through mist. The boy smiled, no fear now, no pain, just peace. As he faded, he whispered one last word, soft as a falling snowflake. "Thank you." And then he was gone. The mill grew still again, silent, empty. Joseph sat there for a long time, the cold floor numbing his knees, his heart slowly stitching itself into something new, something whole. The weight he had carried, the guilt that had gnawed at him across years and continents, dissolved into the air like breath in winter. At last he stood. He walked out of the mill into the crisp morning light, exhaling a breath that shook but felt lighter than any he had drawn in years. The snow had stopped. The sky was clearing. Maple Creek lay before him, quiet, humble, waiting. He walked toward town with slow, steady steps. People waved at him as he passed. Some timid, some grateful, some curious. Mrs. Henley stepped out of her shop, saw him, and hurried over. "Joseph," she called. "Are you all right? You look—" He smiled, a real smile. "I'm okay," he said softly. She hesitated. "Are you sure?" He nodded. For the first time in a long time, yes. Her eyes softened with relief. "You look different." "I am different," he said. "I remembered something I needed to remember." She touched his arm gently. "Good. I'm glad." He looked at her, then at Maple Creek, then at the sky that was slowly blooming with sunlight. "I think I'm ready to start living again." She smiled warmly, tears glistening in her eyes. "You deserve to." Joseph's gaze drifted toward the distant rooftops, where the morning light reflected off snow like scattered diamonds. Somewhere in that brightness, he felt the boy's presence. not haunting anymore, but watching, smiling, forgiving. He whispered into the wind, "Thank you for letting me remember." And as he walked forward, the weight he had carried for so long melted into the fresh snow behind him, footstep by footstep, disappearing into the light of a new day. Joseph Hale moved through Maple Creek not as the crazy old vet or the man lost in fog, but as someone who had crawled through fire twice and finally emerged free. And for the first time in years, he knew exactly where he was going. He walked toward life, toward forgiveness, toward peace. And the boy walked with him, quietly fading into memory, finally at rest.